Welcome in to another episode of the DLF Dynasty podcast. I am Dan Myler with Ryan McDowell and Matt Price. Fellas, we are through wild card weekend, or super wild card weekend, I guess they called it. Ryan, it wasn't all that super, right?
Not that super. Not that super. Some bad football. We're glad there's still football games going on, but there were some blowouts, some pretty ugly games.
Yeah, letting in that 7 seed, maybe that's not so good for the quality of football that's on the field. The 2 versus 7 was pretty rough. There were some other games, Matt, that just weren't as entertaining as expected. I guess the Raiders and Bengals were good, and that Cowboys 49ers game, that was entertaining to watch, but the rest of them were blowouts.
Yeah, the Raiders Bengals game was fun. I would say I think the refs had a little bit too much of a heavy hand in that one a little bit. But otherwise it was good. I thought the 49ers Cowboys game was good too. I mean, but that relied on a, kind of last ditch effort by the Cowboys to pick off and get a pick six from Jimmy Garoppolo. Otherwise that wouldn't have really been a game either. But Dan, I have to ask you, as a Packers fan, did you get watching that game? Did you get Mike McCarthy Packer area vibes from that team? Because it seemed like there was a lot of the same mistakes were being made from a game management standpoint, from not using your players the correct way. I mean, CeeDee Lamb didn't get a catch till the middle of the fourth quarter, something like that. And then it just seemed like there was this kind of lack of energy surrounding the team, and it felt like I was watching a McCarthy area Packers game in the playoffs.
It absolutely was. I thought the same thing, and what highlighted it more than anything else is we watched Ja'Marr Chase be featured for an entire game by that Bengals coaching staff. Clearly, they went into it and said, "This is our guy. This is how we're going to win this game. We're going to pepper him with targets." Then in that same game, the Cowboys and 49ers, Debo was all over the place. Clearly, Shanahan said, "We got to get this guy the ball, whatever it takes." And McCarthy just stood there with his rolled up play call sheet, looking up at the scoreboard and yelling at referees like always. And I had the same feeling. I threw up in my mouth just a little bit a couple times looking over at him. I really thought they were going to fire him. I guess not.
It feels good in the regular season, for the most part, but then you get to the playoffs and it kind of falls apart. It's the same story.
Same old story. We are going to talk about a lot of wide receivers today. Last week, we did all the running backs, tried to get through those consensus tiers, and we did a pretty good job. For the most part, we agreed on most players. We're going to try to see if we can do the same thing with these wideouts this week. So consensus tiers among the wideouts. We might as well get right into it, guys. I just mentioned his name, Ja'Marr Chase. He was the consensus tier 1 guy. And we all threw in Justin Jefferson as well, Ryan. Talk to me about these two young stud wide receivers and why they make up the top tier by themselves.
Well, I mean, you said it, first of all, the young guys, right? 22, 20, 21 in Chase's case, still unreal. I mean, both of them come in, waste no time. Year one, they're proving, despite some pretty stiff competition, Adam Thielen for Jefferson, of course, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd in Ja'Marr Chase's case. But they prove themselves to be the wide receiver one, the alpha on their team immediately. And I mean, basically, both of these guys record setters. It's crazy to think back that these two guys were on the same college team. I want to go back and watch some of those LSU games. But I think Chase and Jefferson, and right now I still prefer Jefferson over Chase, but I think we're really nitpicking there, debating between the two of them. These two guys are locked in, and I think right now there is a huge gap between the two of them and everybody else.
That's what I was thinking as well. It's these two that are probably neck and neck, whether you prefer Jefferson or Chase. That's debatable. We can have a fun conversation about that on another program, of course. Matt, you had Chase and Jefferson, just like me and Ryan, alone in tier 1. Was there anybody else that you considered throwing in there with those two stud young guys?
No, not really. I think you guys are right. Those two stand alone. I actually even considered kind of splitting those two into individual tiers, and then I felt like that was maybe getting too cute with it, just because I think Jamar Chase's situation is so much better than Justin Jefferson's. Better quarterback, obviously, better surrounding talent on the team. And if Kirk Cousins did happen to move on either next year, it's going to be tough with that contract. But a year after that, who knows what quarterback's going to come in there? And we're pretty sure he's quarterback proof. But stranger things have happened to elite quarterbacks. So just a very slightest of separation between those two for me. But then everybody else on that we have in tier 2, I think all have definite flaws that don't stack up against those top 2 guys.
Yeah, we can talk about the quarterback situations as well. Clearly, Burrow is a way better dynasty asset, better NFL quarterback as well. But that situation in Minnesota doesn't seem all that bad, if you ask me. I think they're probably the premier landing spot for a head coaching candidate, which usually means they're going to get the cream of the crop. They're going to get the top guy as long as they act fast. We'll see what they do at the general manager spot if they insist on getting that spot filled first, and if that person that comes into that role will have a say in who the head coach is. If they don't drag their feet, I think they're going to get one of the premier coaching candidates that are out there, and that can only help Justin Jefferson, in my opinion. So tier 1 is Chase and Jefferson, just those 2 guys up there. Tier 2 things get a lot bigger. We had some consensus guys, of course. In fact, there were 9 of them, guys. We had CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, Cooper Kupp, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, and Diontae Johnson. All 9 of those guys fill up tier 2. Matt, if you had to pick out 1 or 2 of these guys that really tell the story of tier 2, who would they be?
The way I kind of phrase this tier, it's the alphas that aren't quite as flawless as those top 2 guys. All of these guys in this tier are the absolute number 1 targets on their team, whether they're a young up and coming stud, we think, like CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown, who both have their issues with either injury or just usage, as we saw with CeeDee Lamb in the playoff game last week. And then you have other older guys like Cooper Kupp, who are getting up there in age, but clearly are producing at an elite level, and it doesn't seem like anything's going to change for them. And then some of the guys on here that have certain flaws, but they kind of are all evidence of this tier. It's just these guys are all alpha receivers. There's no real competition for targets, at least at the receiver position, for these players on their team. So that's kind of how I separated these guys between tier 1 and tier 3.
How about you, Ryan? Is there somebody inside this tier, especially with these veterans, Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, Cooper Kupp, these guys that have been around the block for a while, already in their late 20s, but putting up these elite numbers? How do you feel about mixing those guys in with such cream of the crop young guys, the names that Matt mentioned there?
It's always interesting when you put different types of players into the same tier. I think sometimes we fall into that trap that we think a tier has to be all young players, all starting running backs, what have you. And it's certainly not what we have here with the veterans like Adams, Tyreek, Cooper Kupp, who are older and more established, but they're also safer bets. We like AJ Brown, but he hasn't really been able to stay healthy yet in his career. If he can do that, then maybe he moves up to the tier 1. And the other younger players in this range, DK Metcalf needs to certainly be more consistent. I really think when I look at this tier, the player that stands out to me right now, and he's been a hot topic in the Twitter streets lately, is CeeDee Lamb. Getting a lot of pushback on him as the wide receiver 3. He's been the wide receiver 3 in our ADP at DLF since October. Actually, in one of those months, I believe it was November, he was actually the wide receiver 2. But what we're seeing is his production is not quite living up to that value right now. You look at the 2 guys we've already talked about, Justin Jefferson. In his 2 seasons, he's been a wide receiver 1 33% of the time. Jamar Chase this past year, of course, his rookie year, 29% of the time he was a wide receiver 1. And looking at the rest of this tier, the lowest player in that rank is CeeDee Lamb. 22% of the time he's giving you a wide receiver 1 game, lower than anybody else that we've mentioned here including the rookie Jalen Waddle.
And Waddle is the guy that really jumps off the page for me, because so many were convinced that Chase was going to run away with that number one spot in this rookie class, and there's a case to be made that that's exactly what happened. However, Waddle has put up big numbers. We've talked about him many times throughout the season, highlighted him in that Dolphins offense. Things are only going to get better for him. I've talked about it multiple times that they need to unlock him as a downfield threat on top of him being that underneath option. And he'll truly become that number one receiver that we can count on week in and week out. Has a lot of upside with that. The other name that really, like if you would have said this a year ago, this is the list of the tier 2 wide receivers that might surprise some people, is probably Deebo Samuel. We flash back a year ago, Ryan, and he was a guy that was oft injured and used sporadically inside of that offense. And he just kind of blossomed into this weapon for Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. Earlier this year, he was middling in the 70s and 80s in ADP. And now he's all the way up there in the middle of the second round at 17.
Yeah, I think really what we held against Deebo Samuel, I know this is the case for me at least, was that injury history, because it was something that dated back to college. It wasn't just one kind of fluky injury that had us concerned, or had me concerned at least. But when he has been on the field, even prior to this year, he's been consistent. He's been a fantasy asset, and now it was this year, his third year, when he finally put it all together and was able to stay on the field almost every week of the year.
For me, there was one guy of this consensus guys that I had a hard time with, Matt, leaving in tier 2. He was a fringe guy. It's Diontae Johnson, and it's because of the situation there in Pittsburgh, the unknowns at quarterback, the other weapons that are there in Pittsburgh, and their usage potentially going up. Did you have any hesitation with putting Diontae Johnson in tier 2?
I did, but I looked at him compared to the guys in tier 3, and he seemed to be a cut above for those guys. For me, he seems to be someone who's going to be locked in for wide receiver 1 targets, no matter who the quarterback is. There are issues with Chase Claypool. Juju is likely to be gone. Who knows what's going to happen at quarterback? But Diontae seems to have the skill set that'll mesh with even Mason Rudolph, if that happens to be the guy. It was something none of us really want to happen. And the other thing about this tier is, like sometimes we put these labels on it, like how are we organizing these tiers? It will be trade a significant piece plus somebody in this tier for another person in this tier. And I think in some of those cases that could be said with a guy like Diontae Johnson. Like am I going to how much do I have to put on top of Johnson to get up to CeeDee Lamb? Probably quite a bit, at least a first round pick, if not more. So like from that definition, he probably doesn't fit. But from a production and what he's done on the field for us the last couple of seasons, from a fantasy perspective, maybe it's not the worst idea in the world to go out and say, hey, I'm going to offer up CeeDee Lamb and pick up Diontae and a whole bunch of upside on top of that to build depth or some starters at some other positions where I might have some holes on my team. So the production isn't far off, and in some cases is above the rest of these guys in this tier. But the value, the team situation, the way he's viewed on the market in most dynasty leagues is not the same as some of the other guys in this tier.
And that reason that you just gave is exactly the reason why I struggled so much. The difference between the top of this tier and Diontae Johnson, I felt was significant. So I struggled with it. I ended up with him landing in tier 2, and a similar player, at least a player I value very similarly, T. Higgins in Cincinnati, was a guy I felt belonged, Ryan. If we're going to put Diontae Johnson in there, it felt like T. Higgins belonged as well.
I think he does. His numbers are actually quite similar to CeeDee Lamb. Going back to that conversation, I know our buddy Adam Harstead has made this point. With T. Higgins, you're getting CeeDee Lamb's production at a much cheaper cost, whether you're talking ADP or what he might cost in trade, or even if you want to break it down to a weekly game, his DFS price is always much cheaper for T. Higgins than a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who kind of carries that name value. So I absolutely think Lamb and Diontae Johnson belong in this tier.
Matt, you didn't have T. Higgins in this tier. You put him towards the top of tier 3, or at least I would assume towards the top.
Yep.
Is the fact that Jamar Chase is such an alpha the thing that keeps you from investing at that level in T. Higgins?
That's basically it. Like I said, this was kind of an alpha wide receiver tier with some flaws. And, T. Higgins, I think, can be that and has been in that in the past. But with Jamar Chase there, it's just hard to see him being that on a consistent basis. They also showed earlier in the season a propensity to run the ball quite a bit. And so we have those down volume games. And in those cases, T. Higgins might absolutely guy, but he just seems a little bit less certain. And that's completely by feel. I have no problems with putting him in tier 2, but just the way I broke down my tier 2s, he didn't quite fit that mold for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The guy you did have in here, Matt, was Stefon Diggs, another veteran, a guy who's been around in his late 20s already, kind of was similarly valued to Davante Adams a year ago because of that huge season he had. Well, 2022 or 2021 didn't treat him quite as good as 2020 did. So he fell down a peg or two. Ryan and I kept him out of tier 2. You felt he belongs still.
Yeah, I just looked at his production, and it from on a week to week basis, it was definitely down. He didn't have those huge explosive games like he had in 2020, his first year with the Bills, but he still had a pretty darn good season. 160 targets both seasons in Buffalo, just 2 less than he had last year, and the efficiency was really what changed for him. 127 catches in 2020, down to 103 this year. So the efficiency from a catch percentage wasn't there, but he did have a career high in touchdowns. So I just feel like if we're going to have some of these other guys in this tier, that it was difficult for me to separate him based on production and where we were valuing him at the beginning of the 2021 season. I can certainly understand moving him down a tier, but if we're going to have, again, Diontae Johnson and other guys that have produced similarly, I feel like he belongs, at least from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think I can speak for Ryan. We both think that he belongs close to these guys. There was a little bit of differentiation for me when it comes to Diggs. The last name we need to talk about here, Ryan, is Chris Godwin. You and I both had him here in tier 2. I honestly think he belongs closer to the top of tier 2 than the bottom. What are your thoughts when it comes to Godwin and where he belongs in these tiers?
There's probably some concern right now with the injury. Of course, that late season injury is always going to ding him. He's going into free agency as well, so that's another question. But to me, he's so well established, still just 25 years old. He's giving you a top 24 game over 50% of the time. 54% of his games over the past 2 seasons have been wide receiver 1 or 2 games, and that's even with that crowded depth chart there in Tampa Bay with Mike Evans producing, Gronk and Antonio Brown when he was there producing as well. So I just see no dings in his game, even with those questions I mentioned at the beginning. I think he's a great player to target in drafts or in trades right now.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can get any kind of discount on him this offseason in the leagues where I don't have him. You mentioned that he's going to hit free agency. I can't imagine Tampa Bay lets him out of Raymond James. They're going to want him back for sure. He's going to be a priority for them once again. So tier 2 ends up being CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, Davante Adams, Cooper Kupp, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Diontae Johnson, T. Higgins, and Chris Godwin. So a big tier 2 after just the 2 players in tier 1. Let's jump into the third tier, guys. There are 4 consensus players here, Matt. Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, and DJ Moore. Talk to me about this group that we all put in tier 3.
Yeah, Ridley is. We just don't know when or if he's coming back. I hesitate to say he's not coming back. I think some are just taking the stance that he's done. I'm not ready to go that far yet. And we know what he can do when he is on the field. He certainly was down a little bit during this season, but I don't know if we can really gain much information from what happened for the 2021 season for Calvin Ridley. So, the impression from what he did in prior seasons is still on the mind there. And I see him going really cheaply. So he might be a target right now. If you're of the mind that he's coming back, I think he's somebody you should be looking at to acquire cheap. Amari Cooper, he at this point he feels like he's fine. He's in a good offense. He's gonna get some targets. He's not the alpha, but he's going to be the number 2 on that offense in Dallas if he's back next season. And then Evans, the reason why I didn't put Godwin in tier 2 was mostly Evans, and I probably did consider the fact that he might be in a different situation enough there. But these two are going to go back and forth. They both can have good games, but I wouldn't call either of them a standout alpha, which is why Evans is in this tier along with his teammate for me. And then DJ Moore is just somebody, it feels like he's never going to realize his full potential. Like, he's scoring fine in PPR leagues, but we're waiting on those really consistent breakout games, and he tends to go into these slumps nearly every season. So his is really a target volume I think we're looking at with him. He's always going to get the targets, another huge target season in 2021, but suffering from quarterback play, and he seems like somebody who may not necessarily be quarterback proof, even though he's still putting up relatively good numbers, like wide receiver 2 solid numbers most weeks for us with these crappy quarterbacks. So just what's going to change with his situation, I don't really know. As long as he's there, it seems like he's the alpha there, but the rest of the team around him is not really up to speed with DJ Moore, and that's kind of affecting his production, I think.
Yeah, when I look at those 4 names, Ridley, Cooper, Evans, and DJ Moore, of course, Moore is the youngest, so I think that kind of gives him a leg up value-wise on those other 3 receivers, as far as thinking which one of these guys could be a tier 2 or even a tier 1 wide receiver in the next year or two. But the other thing is just what you mentioned there, Matt. He's had these bad quarterbacks, Cam Newton and Sam Darnold and Teddy Bridgewater. And what happens if they do fix it, right? What happens if they do get Deshaun Watson or Aaron Rodgers or, even Kirk Cousins? I mean, geez, Kirk Cousins would be an upgrade to what he's
massive
what he's had. Yeah, what he's had over his career. So I'm with you guys, obviously valuing DJ Moore in this tier, but of everybody we'll talk about here, I think he's the closest one to tier 2.
Yeah, and the upside of DJ Moore, if that quarterback position is fixed and if that coaching staff kind of puts it all together for that offense, is all the way up there with CeeDee Lamb and those types of names. Whereas maybe Ridley and Cooper and especially Evans, if they get to tier 2, that they're maxed out in the middle of tier 2. They're not going to reach that elite aging wide receiver status that you see from like Devontae Adams or Cooper Kupp, or at least it doesn't feel like that to me. After those 4 names that we all agreed on, we have to get Stefon Diggs in here. And then there's a handful of other names, Ryan, that certainly fit in for me. Elijah Moore, Devontae Smith, Rashad Bateman, Terry McLaurin. You had all these guys in there. Me and Matt didn't have Bateman quite this high just yet. So especially with him, sell me on the reason he should be in tier 3 with these other names.
Yeah, this is certainly a little bit of a bet on the future, because Rashad Bateman, while I feel like he improved throughout his rookie season, he didn't have a single wide receiver 1 game. He's probably the only player we'll talk about today that didn't have a top 12 game, even the rookie class. So there's certainly a little risk if you're drafting Bateman around the names of Diggs or McLaurin, things like that. But essentially, I'm trusting this offense. I think in what we saw from Lamar Jackson before that injury, when he was fully healthy, I think the Baltimore passing offense was, miles better than what we had seen in the past years. Of course, another huge year for Mark Andrews, and Marquise Brown stepped up and was in that wide receiver 1 range when Jackson was healthy. And then when it comes down to it, I think Bateman is a better and more consistent player than Hollywood Brown at this point. So if he's the wide receiver 1 on that team, which I think he can and will be, then this is about where I would value him.
I have a little bit of anxiety with calling him that wide receiver 1, though. Just with the way Hollywood started off the
Sure.
2021 season. While the quarterback position wasn't kind of scrambled and they weren't dealing with all those injuries with Lamar Jackson, he seemed to settle in as that number one target. But as the season rolled on, Andrews took over that main role, and Marquise Brown took a back seat in that offense. He was getting those deep targets, but wasn't peppered in the short to intermediate area as he was earlier in the season. And I don't know if that has to do with Bateman showing up, getting healthy, getting on the field, and him getting some of those opportunities, if it was just the quarterback situation being in flux after the Jackson injury or something else. But either way, I have a little bit of trepidation adding Bateman to these names when the other rookies in this tier are Devontae Smith and Elijah Moore. Those guys certainly established themselves in those roles in year one, where Bateman was just a half a step behind. I completely agree. He has that upside and that potential to jump all the way into that second tier, maybe even the first tier in the long run. I just wasn't quite as willing. I know we're supposed to be projecting forward. He's closer to the top of tier 4 for me. Matt, you had a couple of veterans along with me in this tier. We both had Keenan Allen and DeAndre Hopkins in here. We're still depending on these guys who have been wide receiver ones for their entire career.
Yeah, I think they belong just from a reliability standpoint, and from a value standpoint, you're never going to get a decent return on value on these guys. They're both going to be 30 before the 2022 season starts, but they're both still going to be productive. Keenan Allen, I think you basically lock him in for 95 to 100 plus catches every single season, 1,100 yards, and that like 4 to 6 touchdowns. He hits like 6 or 8 touchdowns in basically every season of his career so far. So. And he's a player that isn't going to rely on a lot of athletic ability. Not that he's not athletic, of course he is, but he relies more on that route running savvy that he's made his living on in the NFL, really. So I think his decline is not going to be nearly as sharp as the other. I think we could, for at least 1 to 2 more seasons, we're going to get that kind of standard line. From Keenan Allen. The same for Hopkins. Hopkins' production obviously fell off before the injury, but I'm not convinced he was really fully healthy all season long. I think he had like a soft tissue, like hamstring or something, like in week 1 or week 2, and it kind of affected him even when he was on the field before he eventually left and decided to have surgery. So I don't think we can really read too much into Hopkins' season based on that. So look for him to come back and have another, at least one of those 150 target kind of seasons, presuming that he's going to stay healthy. So I think they belong. If we're gonna have flaws for these other guys in this list, whether pick a name and there's a flaw. I think that the flaw for these two guys is just their age. And if you have them on your team, you're not going to get the value back anyway in trade. So you might as well keep producing if you are a competitive team.
I could see some of these young guys in this tier: Elijah Moore, Devontae Smith, Rashad Bateman. There's going to be 1-for-1 trades with these rookies for DeAndre Hopkins this offseason. I don't think they're far enough off that you're not going to see those types of things, even with all that age difference. But I feel I agree completely. They belong in this tier. Ryan has them just a couple spots below in tier 4. So because there's 2 of us, they end up in tier 3, which consists of 10 players: Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, and DJ Moore, followed up by Stefon Diggs, Devontae Smith, Terry McLaurin, Elijah Moore, Keenan Allen, and DeAndre Hopkins. So we are through 3 tiers. We are 23 players in. Pretty much, guys, those are the wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s. Things start to get pretty interesting after this. We've gone through the guys who have been consistent wide receiver 1s. We've gone through the guys that are new to the wide receiver 1 conversation, and we've gone through a handful of the guys that we expect to jump into that type of conversation. Then after that, we get into the guys that I feel we're waiting on the wide receiver 2 jump. We're waiting for him to get to that point, and then a handful of these guys will have wide receiver 1 upside as well if they're young enough. Let's get into tier 4. It starts off with a handful of guys that we think are consensus tier 4 guys. It's Michael Pittman, Chase Claypool, Marquise Brown, Brandin Ayuk, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Williams, and Jerry Jeudy. there's a few of these names, Ryan, that are big shockers, or at least would have been big shockers a few months ago. Probably Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Nobody really expected that. Some people would be surprised to see Jerry Jeudy in here if we said this a year ago, because we had those expectations that he'd have the breakout season. So among these consensus tier 4 guys, what really stands out to you?
Well, I think it's got to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. We've got to start there. He is the biggest surprise name on this list, and they're all, I guess, with the exception of Mike Williams, all young wide receivers in their first year or two, maybe 3 years. I think that's Hollywood's case. But St. Brown, I know, and for me, just as each week went by, I kind of made excuses against him. That Hawkinson was out, or Swift was out, or that he wasn't efficient with his targets, and he just kept proving me wrong. And finally, you've got to update your rankings and adjust the value on this guy. And I still expect Detroit to add a wide receiver, whether it be in free agency or in the draft, maybe even both, because they need a lot of help at that position. I don't think he's that prototypical wide receiver 1 type of player, but still in tier 4 and with some of the other relatively unproven players in this tier, he certainly belongs.
Matt, with the expectation of the Lions adding more to that room, that wide receiver room, what are you looking at this offseason? Are you feeling like he's going to be a guy that projecting him forward is going to be surging up as he did late in the season, or do we expect him to come down to earth a little bit?
I think you have to define what down to earth means. I think he's going to settle in as a, fantasy wide receiver too. I think that's kind of going to be his role. If you look what he did when he finally started getting consistent double-digit targets in week 13, that was the first week they really started using him like that. He ended up as the wide receiver 21 overall. So to me, that's very impressive. You get more impressed each and every week with him. And yes, I think Detroit probably brings in a receiver, but I don't know of what quality and how many. I kind of doubt they're going to bring in 2 guys better than Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they have him on staff. They know what he is. They know what he can do well now. So I don't really feel like his usage will change that much. Maybe he's not an alpha. Maybe he wasn't even really this season until he started getting that kind of volume. So I think he's that fantasy wide receiver too. And he's solid, very, very solid for me in that range. So he easily belongs in this tier. And he's one of the guys that I think may even have a chance to break into tier 3 if we were to do this, maybe midpoint way through the 2022 season.
Beyond those 7 names that we have here in tier 4, you had a couple of other guys that you thought settled in, and I agree with you. I had them in as well. Brandin Cooks and Hunter Renfrow, who really had his breakout season for the Raiders this year in the slot as well. Beyond those original 7 names, why did you think that Cooks and Renfrow especially belonged here?
Well, Renfrow is kind of in a situation a little bit, not exactly the same, but a little bit like the guy we just talked about, Amon-Ra St. Brown, just quite a bit older, right? So like he's that slot option, but he's the high volume target. He has an elite tight end playing with him when he's healthy, but that didn't seem to really affect his production, whether or not Darren Waller was on the field. So they're certainly likely to add another wide receiver. But he's going to be that high volume target, I think, now that they know what he has. So kind of a discount Keenan Allen, players of that type, they're going to be high volume, maybe not necessarily high touchdown output, but very consistent. And Cooks just keeps doing it every single year with no matter who the quarterback is of the team that he plays for. Yeah. So he seems very undervalued to me. At this point, as a dynasty wide receiver asset, he finished this season, with the quarterbacks we know that he played with as the wide receiver 20 this year. He's a rock solid wide receiver too, and definitely not being valued that way on the trade market. So someone that if you're just looking to fill that wide receiver 2-3 for very cheaply on your contending team, that's an easy way to go do it is with Brandin Cooks.
I thought the Renfrow Amon-Ra comparison you made is interesting, and if you project those teams to add some some weapons, some competition, and you're worried about that production continuing. The good thing with St. Brown is maybe it's because he's a rookie or because he had that crazy stretch to end the season. I think we've seen the value, certainly the trade value and his ADP vault up. You can sell high on St. Brown. I don't really think you can on Renfrow. Nobody seems to be buying in that he's a real dynasty asset. I mean, you certainly can't get a first rounder for him. I think there are some cases where you may not even be able to get a second rounder for him. So to me, Renfrow is like the definition of a hold right now.
Yep.
I think he's a definition of a buy because of what you just said there.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that's all true,
second, yeah. If you can get him for a second, I'll take 103 catches for over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. The thing that's, he was a lower drafted player. The expectations weren't all that high, and I think he's considered an overachiever. He was that in college at Clemson. Remember, he was kind of just the extra guy. Oh yeah, Deshaun Watson, he just dumps it off to Renfrow when one of those other guys aren't open. And he'd find his way into the end zone in a championship game, and the commentators would talk about how hard he works and how he's a gym rat and all those kind of things. And that's followed him to Oakland and now to Las Vegas, that he's just one of the guys. And now he's turned into one of the guys that can win you a fantasy championship, really, because he's seen as a wide receiver 4 or 5 to dynasty managers, but he plays like a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 with the consistency as a slot target of like a Julian Edelman or something like that. Those are the kind of players that I see when I see Hunter Renfrow. The other thing about Renfrow is he's seen as a guy who's been around, but he's just 26 years old. We're gonna see him manning the slot down there for quite a while yet. So my expectation is that Renfrow continues to be, and we'll have to see what happens with the general manager position and probably the head coach position down there with the Raiders. But I expect him to be a big part of that offense and a big part of my dynasty team's successes moving forward. I really like Renfrow right here in this group. He certainly fits in to me.
Yeah,
the other name. Go ahead.
Sorry, Dan. I was just going to throw in Edelman was a good call because despite the success he had, multiple wide receiver 1 seasons, the value was never there for him. And I think that probably will be the case for Renfrow as well. Even if he continues to put up these numbers, he's never going to be a wide receiver 1 in dynasty. Just not going to happen.
Absolutely not. And probably never going to be worth a first round pick or a first plus anything, just because of those expectations surrounding him. The other guy that we both agreed on belonging here, Matt, was Tyler Lockett. And he was one of the last guys in for me because of the inconsistencies. What vaulted him into tier 4 for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's the story with Lockett is the inconsistency. A gigantic game, 178 yards and a touchdown in week 2, and then several games of 30 to 20 yards, and then another big game, 142 yards, and that's just kind of the rub with Tyler Lockett. But we know he can produce. We know, at least for the moment, he has a quarterback that he has a strong rapport with. And I mean, I just with the rest of these guys in this tier, he seems to fit with that kind of production profile for me. A little bit older, he will be 20. I think he'll also be 30, maybe shortly after the season start next year, something like that. So, in the same vein as some guys that we listed above him, that not quite as elite. Not quite as elite as those guys like Allen and Hopkins from a week to week consistency basis, but still can provide those big games for you. And maybe his price is probably coming down after this season too. I don't know if he's going to be necessarily as cheap as Cooks or Renfrow, but I imagine he's not too far off from that if those guys happen to not be available.
Yeah, he snuck into tier 4 for me because of those elite top end wide receiver 1 overall type weeks that he offers. But man, it's frustrating to put him in your lineup sometimes because you'll have stretches where he catches 3 balls for 50 yards in a 3-week stretch. And that's frustrating for sure. Tier 4 ended up with 11 players. It was Michael Pittman, Chase Claypool, Marquise Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Rashad Bateman, Brandon Cooks, Hunter Renfrow, and Tyler Lockett. I had one other name that I wanted to mention that I thought belongs in tier 4, and that's Darnell Mooney in Chicago. I'm the only one that has him here, but I felt like this was his true breakout season. He had 81 catches. He put up over 1,000 yards, just 4 touchdowns. That probably held him back from posting the really big season. And Ryan, you probably could tell us how many wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 weeks he had. It felt like he was held back by his quarterback play once again this season, even though that leveled off a little bit with the when they drafted a quarterback so high and Allen Robinson was off the field quite a bit more this season. He still, it felt like every time I watched the Bears, he was open and didn't get the ball. And then he'd make an amazing catch, contested catch down the field. And those are the types of things that we want to invest in. We want to have these types of players that can make those incredible catches with guys draped all over him, and then add that to the times where he's wide open and he catches the slant and just gets the 11 yards in the first down. Those are the kind of guys that teams build their offenses around, which the Bears should do at this point. And those are the guys that scored a lot of points for us as fantasy owners. So I think it was a breakout season. And because the stats don't really back that up, his price is still low enough that you can go get him and have higher expectations than what he's done in the past.
Yeah, that's all fair. And in his rookie season in 2020, Mooney, of course, flashed, especially late in the season. 3 wide receiver 2 games, did not have a wide receiver 1 game as a rookie. Of course, that's when Allen Robinson was still relevant back before this bust of a season. But then this year, in what you're calling his breakout, I think I would have to agree with you. 4 wide receiver 1 games, 4 more games as a wide receiver 2. He gave you top 24 production in nearly half of his total games this year, which is basically in line with all the other players that we've talked about. In fact, it's basically almost the same as CeeDee Lamb, the hot topic of the day.
Yeah, that seems to be what all these conversations go back to. So we're through
frustrating
for sure. We're through 4 tiers. We're going to try to get a couple more tiers in before we get out of here, guys. But we should mention our friends over at Monkey Knife Fight with the Dynasty regular season and the Dynasty playoffs over. Right now is the perfect time to try Monkey Knife Fight. I know all 3 of us love these player prop games that are offered over there at Monkey Knife Fight. They offer these DFS games where you don't have to compete against those professional players and put together those time-consuming salary caps. Instead, you play more or less, where you decide if a player is going to go over or under, more or less than his projected stat. If you win, if you're right, you win money. So it's a lot of fun, especially in these playoff games. It's a great opportunity to dip your toe into these player props. If you haven't tried it, dip your toe into Monkey Knife Fight, because we have a great offer. If you sign up for a new account over at Monkey Knife Fight with a first-time deposit, you're going to not only get that deposit matched up to $100 with the promo code DLF, but you're also going to get a free full year of DLF Premium. So head over to dynastyleaguefootball.com, click the image for Monkey Knife Fight on the side of the page, and follow the instructions to get that free year of DLF Premium and that deposit match up to $100 at Monkey Knife Fight. Let's get into tier 5, fellas. Things are kind of spreading out a little bit now, Ryan. We're a little bit all over the place. Mooney fits in here. We all have Allen Robinson falling in here. Also Robert Woods, Odell Beckham Jr., Christian Kirk, and Adam Thielen. So we have young guys, we have old guys, we have a mix and match of talent. You had Hunter Renfrow and Mooney and others. We also had Tyler Boyd and Van Jefferson. Cortland Sutton fits in here. Juju Smith-Schuster you actually had in the tier before this, as well as Rondale Moore. So that's a lot of names to try to digest. Let's talk about the guys that you had in tier 4 that end up in tier 5, because me and Matt are a little lower. That's Rondale Moore and Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, a couple of my personal favorites that I'm not quite ready to let go of, especially Rondale Moore. I mean, the usage has been the usage this rookie season was a little frustrating, but I think it's probably fair game to criticize the entire Arizona offense. I don't know that I'm ready to put that on Rondale Moore, but at the same time, you wonder if that's going to change moving forward. So I really like the value that you can find with him right now, but at the same time, some uncertainty. And then Juju, just my guy. Can't give up on him yet. Hoping he lands in a nice spot, but not sure if it even matters. Sadly,
Juju is 25, a full season younger than a full year younger than Hunter Renfrow, but has played 2 more seasons in the NFL.
That's insane. Every time I see Juju Smith-Schuster catch a pass or on a commercial or anything, that's what I think of. That dude's super duper young and had that unbelievable breakout season at such a young age. I still hold out hope as well. I mentioned you have him in tier 4. I have him towards the top of tier 5. He's still a guy that I would love to see get connected to the right offense with the right coach and the right quarterback to really unlock that potential once again. Another guy that throughout his career feels like he's always open underneath. And we need to get him with somebody who can take advantage of that skill set. Beyond that, I mentioned Woods, Odell Beckham, Christian Kirk, Adam Thielen. Those were the guys, Matt, that we all 3 agreed on belong here. But there's a handful of those other names, including young guys like Kadarius Toney, and you had Rondale Moore in here. Is there anybody specifically that you want to highlight in tier 5 as a guy that you think is either moving way up or could be moving down soon?
There's 2 guys that we haven't talked about yet, and there's two veterans, Michael Thomas and Allen Robinson. I think we can value them pretty similarly at this point. I think both of their best days are probably
because of lost seasons.
Because of lost seasons, yeah, and just lack of production, and even when they are on the field lately. And both of these 2 guys have probably, their absolute ceiling is probably behind them, but they're definitely better days ahead. So, if we're gonna throw out paying a second for Hunter Renfrow, can I get Michael Thomas for a second and maybe a little bit more? Maybe that's the kind of risk I want to take. It just kind of depends on your profile and what you're looking for from safety or upside standpoint. And Allen Robinson, we certainly think that this year he's finally getting out of Chicago and maybe gets to choose the place that he wants to play. And if that happens, maybe we get the happy Allen Robinson back who's motivated to, run routes and do stuff on the field. So those 2 guys scream value to me if you're looking as like a contender looking to add some upside for cheap. To fill out not only some depth on your roster, but potentially even be a consistent starter once they're back to full strength.
Yeah,
Ryan,
I like.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I like the idea of buying low on Allen Robinson and Michael Thomas, but I'm just not sure how realistic it is, especially throwing out a second. I don't think they're worth a first, or I don't think most people would pay a first rounder for either of those guys. But if you've held this long, like, why give up this point for a second rounder, right? I mean, if I've stuck with Michael Thomas for the past 2 years when he basically has given me nothing, then I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see where he lands this offseason. I think we all presume it will be with a new team. I want to see if he could be healthy or get healthy and stay healthy, and really kind of the same thing with Allen Robinson. So I like both of those as buy lows, but I think it may have to be a differently structured deal rather than just throwing out picks.
I think you're probably right, but just, we got to do it. We got to go to the trade finder. Just a few days ago, a 2nd and a 4th round pick for Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson in the 2nd for Jerry Jeudy. You probably want Jeudy there, I guess, in most cases. But I think there are deals like around that. The top one on here is maybe not a good one. Allen Robinson and a 1st for AJ Brown. I'll go ahead and take AJ Brown there. So the value's kind of all over the place. I mean, if you're interested, I would feel out the manager, but I would say in most cases you're probably right. You're not going to get it for a single 2nd round pick.
Yeah, but you highlighted a couple that where it did happen, and like Ryan said, why you jumping ship now? That you waited this long. Holy cow!
I'm giving people too much credit.
You're bored, man. You're bored.
Yeah, I guess you did.
they've been sitting on your roster. You're bored. You can't do anything with them. Like let's see if somebody else can hit.
Rookie fever, right? Even in this draft class.
Yep, for sure. Ryan, you had Michael Gallup and Tyler Boyd also in this tier. I agreed with you. Got them in here as well. Tell me about these guys. Gallup with the injury, Boyd playing third fiddle really there in Cincinnati, but showed his worth late in the regular season, and now in the playoffs, another chance to do that. Why do these guys fit in?
I think both have lost a little bit of value this season for the exact reasons you mentioned. Boyd is the clear third option in Cincinnati, maybe even fourth, depending on how they use the tight end or the running back in some games. And then the late season injury for Gallup. So I really like Michael Gallup as a buy low this offseason. Still expect him to land in a decent spot, and maybe that even increases his chances of staying in Dallas. I think that's still probably a good thing. But Boyd, I mean, just a good solid wide receiver option, right? Good solid flex guy every week. Give you 10 points a week. Nothing flashy, and honestly, not a ton of upside at this point.
We had a couple of us that had Kadarius Toney in there, so he fits into this.
He's got the
tier.
upside.
He's got the upside for sure. If he can get a quarterback and an offense and all those things. The floor is lava with him. And then Matt, you and I both had Van Jefferson in this tier as well. That's projecting upside for sure. Talk to me about Jefferson.
Yeah, I just, if we're going to put Beckham in this area, I feel like we got to have Jefferson too. Beckham has certainly affected Jefferson's, market share a little bit, but he's been used in similar ways. And I think in some ways you can say that Van Jefferson has been the better downfield threat than Beckham has. And I would have, if we were talking about their skill sets, I would think that Beckham would kind of win the race from that aspect. But Cooper Kupp has been used so much underneath that's kind of been taken away a little bit from Van Jefferson's role in that area of the field. So, if Beckham moves on, if they get sick of him, there's lots of ways that Beckham could screw up this tenure with the Rams, right? So, in that case, Jefferson would be, again, one of the top 3 target getters, regardless of what happens with Beckham and with Woods coming back. So he seems to be somebody who's going to stick on a good team with a good quarterback and a good surrounding cast. So, maybe it's a little bit high, but I would rather probably have Van Jefferson than Kadarius Toney right now, personally.
Boy, Beckham is.
Yeah, I would take Toney too. Beckham is a free agent, and you've still got Robert Woods kind of waiting in the wings there. We assume he'll come back from that injury. There were some trade rumors, even some rumors that he could be a cap cut a year ago. So clearly some uncertainty with what that Rams depth chart will look like. We know Cooper Kupp will be there. We know Van Jefferson will be there. It's just a question of, will Jefferson be the 2 or the 3? I think he's done enough to at least be the 3. So maybe they're deciding between keeping Robert Woods or giving OBJ a new contract. But regardless, I like investing in Van Jefferson, even though I had him a little bit lower on my list. And he kind of feels like a discount Christian Kirk. Kirk gets a little more hype. Kirk was higher drafted if we're going back several years. But they're both guys who are never going to be the number 1 option on their team. I'd take Toney in the comparison you made, Matt, but I think it's fair to prefer Jefferson to Christian Kirk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kirk is one of the guys in this tier. He's a fun guy to talk about, Van Jefferson, because we've seen the upside, the ability to get open. We've also seen some of the downside, the drop passes, the ones that clank off his hands for potential big plays. That's been frustrating a little bit for all of us as Van Jefferson managers. I'll be watching closely this offseason to see how that all plays out, because I think he has a chance to step forward next season. Tier 5, I think we've probably spent enough time on this. 14 players. Robert Woods, Odell Beckham, so a couple Rams there along with Van Jefferson. Then Christian Kirk, Adam Thielen, Michael Thomas, Darnell Mooney, Allen Robinson, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, Michael Gallup, Tyler Boyd, and Cortland Sutton. 14 players in Tier 5. Let's quickly touch on Tier 6. We had a handful of guys, Ryan, that were consensus: DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, Terrace Marshall, Josh Palmer, Kenny Galladay, and Will Fuller. Is there anybody out of this group that really jumps off for you?
Starting to get a little ugly here. I really like Josh Palmer. I think Palmer could be the type of player whose ADP and whose value steadily rises all off season. Of course, we're thinking Mike Williams is probably gone from that team. We've seen Josh Palmer perform when some players were out due to injury or COVID. So I really like Palmer from this group. He kind of stands out to me. Shenault, just how many more chances are we going to give this guy? Somebody compared him to Cordarrelle Patterson. So if that's the comp, maybe we have to wait 8 more years. Wait 8 more years to get something out of him. And then the other player that you mentioned that I kind of like still is Will Fuller. Obviously a lost season from him. His I know that's never a Dan favorite, but
yeah, that grossed me out a little bit.
Yeah. Honestly, kind of a little bit in the Juju Smith-Schuster range as far as his dynasty value is really going to be determined by what the NFL tells us his actual value is, or what type of contract he gets on the free agent market.
Well, if steroids were legal, he'd be great. He'd be awesome because he can't stay healthy without them. Beyond that, I actually had Gabriel Davis in tier 5, the one above this. I really love his skill set. I loved him coming out of college. And the Emmanuel Sanders thing, they flirted with that for the first half of the season, guys. And that, as he started deteriorating a little bit and got off the field, all of a sudden, Gabriel Davis started showing up again, catching passes once again. Now, he also had a 13 target game or 14 target game in championship week 18 for some, and turned that into 3 catches for 39 yards. But his 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games, I think they see him as an outside threat, a guy that can catch a lot of passes. And I want that guy in a Bills offense. So we'll see how that plays out. Gabriel Davis ends up in tier 6 as well, along with Corey Davis, Jarvis Landry, and Devontae Parker, with the names I mentioned before. Matt, is there anything really in tier 6 or beyond that catches your eye?
No, Ryan talked about Shenault, and I don't want to give up the hope. I mean, if you squint really hard and you gave him Kyle Shanahan as his coach, could he be 80% of Deebo Samuel? That's kind of the risk I see with Shenault and giving up on him right now. Is we know the talent is there. The thing that we were really questioning coming out of school was his health, and for the most part, he's been dinged up here and there, but for the most part, he's remained relatively healthy in the NFL. And I just don't know how much we can take from the 2021 season for any Jacksonville Jaguar, to be honest. So he's somebody who I'm not quite giving up hope on.
We made it through 58 wide receivers that covered 6 tiers. Tier 1 was Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Tier 2, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Diontae Johnson, T. Higgins, and Chris Godwin. And then Tier 3 to kind of round out those wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s. That was 10 players: Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Stefon Diggs, Devonta Smith, Terry McLaurin, Elijah Moore, Keenan Allen, and DeAndre Hopkins. Guys, real quickly, who are we buying this offseason, Ryan? Who's the guy that you really want to add?
Ooh, I have to narrow it down to one?
Yeah, if you can.
I think about the highest upside player that I have ranked higher than most. Probably T. Higgins. I've got him as basically as a wide receiver 1. I think some are not quite that high on him. So T. Higgins, and I still have some hope for Chase Claypool. He's the guy I was valuing as that borderline wide receiver 1 last year that did not pan out yet.
Now probably closer to borderline wide receiver 2. Matt, for you, is there a guy you're buying?
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with Rondale more. Ryan talked about him a bit earlier, but still a big believer, one of my favorite players in this year's class, and I don't think we've seen the best from him. I paid way too much for him mid-season, and I'm happy to pay less than that this offseason to get some more copies of Rondale Moore.
For me, it's Hunter Renfrow. We talked about him as a guy that's under the radar. If you're in a league with me and you have Hunter Renfrow, expect an offer in the inbox here this week. I'll be after him.
Ask for an
That's going to
extra
do
third.
it for this episode of the DLF Dynasty podcast. We did all the consensus tiers of running backs last week. This week, of course, was wide receivers. Next week, we're gonna tag team things. We're gonna do both quarterbacks and tight ends, consensus tiers, on episode 499 of the DLF Dynasty podcast. For Ryan and Matt, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening. We're going to catch you again next week.